Hello, welcome, and thanks for joining Life Raft and our panelists today to discuss the important topic of misinformation. Misinformation means false facts spread by people who think that they're true. Misinformation is everywhere online, and the spread of it on social media has been particularly rapid and difficult to control. People posting just about everything on social media leads to misinformation on just about everything, and we've seen it from government and politics to businesses, celebrities, and everyday people. A study from USC showed that 15% of frequent social media sharers were behind up to 40% of the fake news. In another study, Statista reports that 52% of Americans feel that online news websites regularly report fake news stories. So even if a news story might be true, some of it people still think of it as false and they share it with others as false. The impact, as we will hear from our panelists today, has been severe, destroying trust and reputations and harming people, businesses, and economies. Before we dive into how we can identify misinformation and help combat it, I'd like to introduce our panelists. Adam Huenke is an OSINT analyst and trainer renowned for his experience in leveraging open source tools to uncover the truth. Yasmeen Ziada is a senior researcher and analyst at 2430 Group who specializes in misinformation detection and analysis. Youri Zwart is a co-founder of SecDesk, a leading voice in cybersecurity and the fight against digital misinformation. Welcome, and let's get started. Yas, you scour the internet on a daily basis for misinformation. What are some of the common types of misinformation that you're seeing online?
Yeah. I'll start by kind of going back to basics a little bit. And I know you've gone over what misinformation is. Just want to fill in disinformation as well. So misinformation is false or inaccurate information spread unintentionally. And this could be because of someone's reliance on unverified sources or maybe accidental mistakes. Whereas disinformation is more of a deliberate spread of false information, and the intent is to mislead or manipulate an audience. And what can happen is the spread of disinformation will also turn into misinformation as people are picking up these sources and sharing them, believing that they're factual. So what I look at on a daily basis at 2430 Group is generally foreign state-sponsored mis and disinformation focused on U.S. elections. So those things that we're looking at are, what are foreign states saying that are trying to cause discord within U.S. voting audiences. So some examples of how this looks. Yesterday, actually, the U.S. Justice Department charged 2 Russian media executives in an alleged scheme to funnel money to a U.S. Tennessee-based company that created and published propaganda videos, and they appeared to have millions of views across social media, so TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, X, and essentially what happens is these videos are spread, picked up by others, and it goes down this rabbit hole of causing, maybe internal strife within our countries. Similar with Iran, what we're looking at is Iranian cyber-enabled influence operations. Some of what we've seen in the past are impersonations. So something that you'll see is we've seen Iranian actors impersonating American extremists, again, to sow discord among U.S. voters. And we're seeing that kind of continue this year. And one way we're seeing that happen is through websites. These websites are masquerading as news outlets that are actively engaging U.S. voter groups on opposing end of political spectrums. And they have polarizing messaging. So this is really where we get into what we're seeing these days. And so this messaging is, misdis about political candidates, misdis about, or just general negative sentiment towards LGBTQ rights, immigration, and then one that's come up a lot that I'm sure you all have seen has been Israel.
Yeah, thanks, Yaz. These both with Russia and with Iran, these stories literally just in the news this week being reported on. So this conversation could not be more timely. And thank you for mentioning, all of the election-related misinformation out there. Youri, I bet through your company, you've been contacted by a lot of businesses with questions relating to this issue. So can you share from a business standpoint, what is the business impact that businesses are having on misinformation? So taking it away from election, government, politics focus, and instead thinking about this impact from a business standpoint.
Well, it really depends on what the misinformation we're talking about, of course. One of the things which we see quite a lot is companies who get a bad name online for something they have not done, but somebody just having beef with them or thinking that they are a bad company in whichever way, and that totally being taken out of context, or some piece of information which is even shared, which wasn't there to begin with, which is false to start with. And especially with the newer generation, I hate the fact that I have to call this the newer generation now at my age, but changing their way from finding information, whereas we usually use Google, the first sources, this new generation is looking a lot on social media to find their first information, like TikTok, like Instagram, and all the other social medias, which means that they see a lot of information where people talk about the factual information instead of actually looking at the first term factual information. And that second hand is something which companies struggle with a lot, because they see all these people talking about things which they've not dealt with at all. And I think that's a major issue for companies, which we hear a lot.
Yeah. Thanks. And Adam, how about you? You've been training the private sector for a while now, and you come from the financial industry as well. So what are some of the ways you've heard from the people that you've trained, or just from your past experience in the financial industry? What can be the impact for businesses with misinformation?
When you look at it, mainly it'd be financial impact for the most part. I agree with what Youri says, from the fact that this new generation is getting all their information from secondhand sources and not seeking out the true information. They're trusting these influencers and these people out there sharing things, not realizing they're sharing it for a reason. Either it's for clicks or it's for some other purpose. And so we've got to start digging deeper and verifying, the sources of information we're getting. But from a business standpoint, if I'm a bank and someone's bad mouthing me, it's going to impact the money that I'm bringing in or what I'm trying to do for my customers. A lot of the other OSINT groups that I've trained and talked to, that's the same thing. It's impacting their bottom line, that dollar, that whole thing that everyone's trying to make. And it's bad. It needs to stop.
Yeah. And in addition to finances, like impacting finances, impacting people too, the reputation, the loss of the trust and reputation people have of the company might affect clients and partnerships that they're able to keep, certainly all of those things. So Adam, how can OSINT be used to fact check information and debunk false claims then?
We've got to do a better job of researching this information and looking for the truth, right? Again, as I mentioned, a lot of the stuff we're seeing, people are using Instagram and these influencers to find information when they don't go and look for it. Going and just doing Google search, like Youri mentioned, you're going to find better sources. Really look at what the source of that information is. Is it an influencer? Is it a legitimate newspaper or a legitimate organization? There are websites out there that'll fact check this stuff for you, but it really comes down to the basis of research in OSINT. It's the research portion of it. Don't take everything at face value. Always question, is this true or isn't this true from an analyst perspective? Put on that analyst cap and look for that stuff.
Yeah, and especially today, I agree with that. Definitely always be questioning, never take something as face value. And you're right. I mean, even just sometimes for an everyday person trying to do some research, you don't need to be an OSINT expert. You just Google it, find, the original source of it, just learn a little bit more, and you'll probably be able to debunk it or determine its credibility pretty easily. All right, so Youri, Why should teams learning how to leverage OSINT care about misinformation? Like the big question here, like why care so much about this problem? Youri, are you there?
Oh, sorry. I thought my connection dropped there for a second. Could you repeat the question, Rachel? Sorry.
Oh yeah, no problem. It's why should people care about learning OSINT to help with misinformation?
Yeah, so I think this links back to a discussion I used to have a lot with people about privacy, where it used to be that privacy was this thing, especially when I have this conversation with my mom, where she says, well, I've got nothing to hide. And well, I can name you a few things which you have to hide in the privacy spectrum. I think that right now, in looking at the truth and looking what's true, a lot of people will say like, oh, but that's something very far, or that's not something which I have to deal with. But I think you do. I think a lot of people do have to deal with it, because there is, even on a micro scale, there is a lot of this misinformation being used, for instance, to sell you things by these influencers, as Adam got to as well, that you use this information from the influencer. A very simple example is there was this tooth cleaning solution which came out on TikTok Shop last month. And within 2 weeks of it being sold by influencers, it sold about 100 million bottles, or some idiotic amount like that. And a week later, it came out that, well, actually, it was just a repackaging of a thing which was already on the market for a long time, and it didn't do anything extra. So being able to look at these things for yourself can benefit you not only in a business way, but also just in a personal way. And I think it's always important to look at the truth, look at what is real and what is fake out there. But I think if we also focus on these micro stories, I think people might get more engaged and might find it more useful to also be dealing with this subject.
Yeah, and as you stress, it spreads so rapidly. You know, that TikTok misinformation, it ends up on Instagram, it ends up on Facebook. As Yaz said, it just travels all over the place so quickly now. Yaz, what are some of the red flags to know when something is misinformation? I'm sure you know how to spot it just like that.
I mean, I think, for it can be very. It might seem basic to some. For others, it might not seem very basic, especially because it's so prevalent. But really, some things that other speakers have already spoken about. Some of it is, if you do a quick search on something, what other evidence do you see of this being a real thing? So if you were to quickly go to Google and see that nothing else is there, then there's a high chance that this is not true information, or maybe the articles that you do see are not from very credible sources of information. That's one way. I think generally lack of transparency. So if you're reading from maybe news articles, if the sources aren't including, contact information specifically for websites, authorship, dates of publication, those can be all flags that this might not be real. A quick example before I continue down that is, I think Adam mentioned this, spammy AI-driven websites that are kind of bot-driven in a sense, where websites are created and they're creating and posting information at mass levels on websites, oftentimes for ad revenue. They're not real. It's not real. The information in it isn't necessarily true or false, but it's an effort to gain money by using ads. So that's one other thing. And oftentimes these websites are not properly set up in a way to believe that they are legitimate. Some other red flags are, specifically on social media, can be spammy behavior. So if you look into an account that might be sharing something, what other things are they posting? Like what is the general content they're talking about? How often are they posting? Sometimes some general signals of a red flag account or user is mass posting at all times of day, posting at random times of the day that don't make sense, various different topics, things like that.
Okay. Yeah, those are all great tips. So analysts and investigators, they're really busy. As we've said, we have to question everything now, every single post that they see. How many posts or news articles do they look at on a daily? Probably a lot. So while these steps do sound simple, when you think of them at volume, it could get a bit overwhelming. So are there any tools out there that could help speed up this process at all that you would recommend?
Specifically looking at accounts and general mis and disinformation, or tools for overall, if you come across something, or how to dig into this OSINT topic?
Yeah, tools that would help an analyst or investigator spot misinformation.
Yeah, I mean, for investigators specifically, social media listening tools are super useful. So being able to kind of see things at a larger scale and help you analyze them on a bigger picture. I think really, if you want to discern what the mis and disinformation is, there are some websites that are touching on these things. I know that there are, there are news fact checking sites. Some are more reliable than others. I wouldn't go ahead and trust any one of them. But I think one source that I do like is NewsGuard. NewsGuard is one that, if you're looking at news in general, has a general theme and will touch on who all has covered this piece of news and their biases, their general biases and alignment, specifically in terms of parties. But looking at more bigger picture OSINT issues, maybe you're looking into reposting of a video that people are saying was more recent, maybe a protest that's happening in DC, but actually it was something from years ago. If you want to do that research yourself, there are some good sources and tools that can help you get started with doing that research. So Bellingcat, DFR Lab, Intel Techniques, these places have trainings, have blog posts and things like that to look into. And they also publish their own pieces that go into different areas of mis and disinformation that they're seeing. And a nice thing about OSINT is people really walk you through their steps, because OSINT should be replicable by other people. So you can really learn how to uncover and untangle webs of mis and disinformation and use OSINT techniques by reading through these blogs.
Awesome. Those are great. Thank you for sharing. And that's not even on a in an individual post basis, but on a larger basis too. You gave some people good resources. Adam, how about you? Any extra tips, tools for determining if something's credible or not?
Yasmeen brings up the great Bellingcat. They're great at finding this information. Another couple places out there, and again, whether you trust them or not, because everybody has their own leanings when it comes to, especially in the political space. You've got Snopes, you've got factchecker.org, but again, you've got to understand that one source isn't the answer. This goes back to the foundations of intelligence and intelligence principles. You can't just use one thing to find the information. You've got to use multiple things. And I think one thing I forgot to touch on is that the hard part with all of this is, we are such a quick gratification society now. That's why people are using social media. 90% of people are on social media more than you could imagine every day. They spend hours upon hours of it. I think the statistics that I last saw was like the average individual spends 6 hours a day looking at social media. Now, you might go, wait a minute, how? There's only 24 hours in a day. You're sleeping for 8 of those. How are they on for? You're on for quick hits, 10 or 15 minutes, and you're seeing quick stuff that those social media sites are feeding you. And that's the other problem, is that sometimes we need to look at what's being done at these social media companies. We saw recently Facebook said, yeah, we subverted or stopped publishing things that were not for the election, I think back in 2020. This is a big problem. But back to your first question on tools, again, you've got Snopes.com, you've got factcheck.org. really, it just comes down to, I think people need to start asking more questions about what they're seeing. Yes, social media is a big part of our lives, but ask that further question. And I've been imparting that on my 18-year-old daughter for the last several years to get her to understand that social media, yes, it's great, but you need to ask further questions.
Yeah. And Youri, I'm going to turn to you because identification is really only the first step when it comes to combating misinformation, as Adam touched on, and we could spend forever talking about this, as to like how the social media companies are trying to combat information. I'm going to ask you, Youri, how businesses can help correct and prevent the spread of misinformation, putting the big socials aside. If you're a large company, you might have a PR team, you might have a marketing team, you might have an entire team dedicated to finding and stopping this. But what would you say to like a smaller company that's just looking like they might have an issue with this? What type of advice would you give them to prevent it and fight it?
I think if you want to fight these kind of injustices, misinformations in general, I think it's important that you are, as a company, part of these social medias, that you are actually having your company account out there, that you are actually publishing yourself stuff. I hope I'm not making a big fuss if I name company names here, but there is a genius series on social media by Scrub Daddy. Scrub Daddy had this massive problem with all these brands trying to pull them down and trying to make them look bad. But because they already had a social following and they were already posting, they were quick to intervene in those and started posting reactions to those videos, which they saw that were wrong. And because this was already an account which had a following, that is very powerful. And I think that is always in the bigger picture. If you want to combat these kind of things, don't shy away from these things, but try to also be in this conversation. If you step out of the conversation, if you alienate other people in this conversation, then you'll never get through this problem in any meaningful way. So I think being part of it, and of course for smaller companies, this is going to be more difficult. And I fully understand. I do think that a lot of these tools and a lot of regulations and rules, they are still to be continued. They still have to grow because it's a new problem on this scale. The misinformation, of course, is not a new problem, but on this scale we're seeing right now is a new problem. I do think that's still going to evolve. I also don't know where that's headed, but I think being part of the conversation instead of pulling back from it is very important.
Yeah, I mean, you can't react to it, and you can't even know if it's going on if they're not on social media themselves, right?
Exactly.
Are there any ethical considerations to keep in mind when it comes to this, Youri?
Well, ethical considerations, I think one of the things what you got to watch out with, especially when you do your own research into OSINT, I think both Adam and Yasmeen have touched on some tools which are very, very open tools and don't go very far into things, but there are tools, especially for OSINT researchers, which Adam has most likely used in his career, which can go quite far. And those tools are sometimes open source. You can use them as a person yourself. But I think always if you do these kind of researches, just be considerate about what you are doing and what you're using. Also on that side, research what you're using. The last tool I just wanted to quickly add for people to quickly check, because I totally agree that if you see 100 posts, it's very impossible to fact check all of those. Just a very small tool, I think, which can be very useful is Google image search. If there is a post with the image of a brand or something on there, just put it in Google image search and you'll see some results. And if those are literally only influencers and there is no credible news outlet behind it or anything, scratch behind your ear, have a look, see what it's actually about.
Yeah, that's a great point. And also, if you image search something, you might find it's photoshopped. And there's been other versions of it out there. So that's another really quick tip that I'm sure will be helpful to people. Any tips for avoiding the spread of misinformation? How could everybody listening to this call today avoid contributing to this issue?
I think the main thing here, and this is something that, you know, I think about personally a lot, is question yourself a lot, ask yourself these questions, and be critical of yourself and your own opinions. I find that the easiest way to slip into promoting and sharing misinformation is by resharing or reposting or engaging with something that you personally believe in. And so being able to question yourself and be okay with being wrong sometimes is super important. So always question yourself, be critical of your thoughts. And if you do happen to share something, be okay with also having to walk back later and say, oops, I got some new information, I learned something new, and this was actually incorrect. That's what I would say is the best way to personally avoid spreading misinformation. Question yourself, do the research, look for those red flags, and then.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, before you just immediately hit repost or reshare, just think twice about it, and maybe you could avoid it.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to read a bit of a fact here, and this goes toward, you know, since it's difficult for businesses to control it, it's difficult for main social media platforms to control it. According to a study by Pew Research, 48% of US adults say that the government should restrict false information online, even if it means losing some freedom to access and publish content. So I want to open this up to all of our panelists right now. Do you think that the government has a role to play in ensuring the integrity of the news shared and consumed? And I will ask, Youri, I know you're from the Netherlands, so this is, I guess, on a global basis, but with a specific focus on the US for the study.
Yeah, I think on my view as Dutch or European, I think my view of government is a bit different than from how it's viewed in the States. So I think this is something which is going to differ from country to country. My personal opinion is that it is always dangerous to put government in charge of information, simply because your government can change over time. And this is something which, if we talk about, for instance, saving video from CCTV cameras on the street, everybody's like, yeah, but it's in the hands of the government. That's okay, right? Yeah, but what is your government going to be in 10 years? Sorry to say, but we saw this a few years happen in the US. Who is then turning those knobs and who has access to that information at that point? And I think that can also work in this case, where the information, what we believe is to be true, if the government is behind that and we all say like, okay, that type of information is correct, it's a slippery slope, I think.
Adam, yes, any comments?
I totally and 100% agree. One, having worked for the government and you know, as a military member and then doing other things, it's not that I don't trust the government, but I don't need their help to tell me to stifle what's going on, especially here in the United States where we have freedom of speech. You're coming into those legal terms, those legal things that are going on. And again, what's to say that they're not going to change what was out there originally or manipulate it in some way and use it against you eventually? Say you post something and now they're going to come and arrest you. What if they arrest you for it? And you're like, well, but that was true. Nope, not according to what we say. We're getting into, I hate to say it, some like 1984 Orwellian stuff here that would just, I don't know why people think this is the answer, but it's not. It's a scary thought.
I'll cut in here and kind of add that it's a pretty nuanced question to me as well. And I think for similar reasons as the others have noted. And I think also part of it has to do with what constitutes protected speech and free speech. Government has a right and duty to identify mis and dis, but social media platforms and places where these are shared are also free to respond to mis and dis and government views as they decide. You know, I think that there is a delineation of private companies. These private companies are not utilities or public carriers. So I think they should and can and do publish or not publish what they want.
Yeah. And everyone that participated in that study, and us on the call today, I'm sure what we would all agree on as a common ground is that this is a big problem, and it's going to take a force to really help get it under control. So contribution from everybody, including ourselves. So if our listeners want to keep learning about this topic, this is how we'll end the webinar for today. We talked plenty of tools today. Are there any other books, podcasts, websites people should visit to learn more?
I think what we've covered already, Bellingcat, DFR Lab, Intel Techniques, Google are great places to start.
I'll add one more and take this with a grain of salt. Like we talked about reverse image searching. If you have a photo that's got faces in it, it's going to be controversial, but go to Yandex. They have a great facial recognition, and it will help you identify the true source of it. Now, again, understand you're probably giving that to the Russian government, so don't take a photo of someone that from a source or something like that and post it that's not already been on the internet. But if it's already been on the internet, it'll help you find the real one.
I'll give a shout out to Jane's as well. I listened to their podcast. They've held podcast episodes on misinformation several times over the years. And I really enjoyed listening to everyone. So I recommend that. And I believe Life Raft has left a QR code for our white paper linked here if anybody wants to learn more as well, which is also a great read. All right. Well, I think that wraps up for today. Maybe we'll have to do a part 2. I'm sure there's plenty we can continue to talk about for this, but thank you all for joining us today.